The global network that I work for was created in 1992 when several of us began to realize that the arms race was preparing to move into space, and there wasn't much of a consciousness about it around the world. And so today we have over 150 affiliate groups on virtually every continent who are working now to keep space for peace. I grew up in a military family. My dad was in the Air Force, and we moved all over the world. In 1968, we were living in the panhandle of Florida. So conservative there, you know, they called it Lower Alabama. I was 16 years old, and I had my first organizing experience. I volunteered to work on the Nixon campaign for president, and I was elected as the vice chair of the Okaloosa County, Florida Young Republican Club. And I did such a good job on that campaign that right before the election, they had a fundraiser for Nixon, and they invited me to sit at the head table with the honored speaker that evening. Some of you might have heard of the guy, Senator Strom Thurmond from South Carolina. Why do you moan? I don't... Well, the story only gets worse from there. In 1971, I tried to join the United States Air Force, wanting to be a career man like my dad. And I took my physical and actually flunked my physical because of an old high school football injury. And so here at a time when most guys of good sense were trying to stay out of the military because of the Vietnam War, I had to get a waiver to actually get into the Air Force. And I succeeded. And after my training, I was sent to a base in California, Travis Air Force Base, which was an airlift base for the war in Vietnam. And GIs would come from all over the country to get on the airplanes to go to the war. And when the planes would come back, they would bring the body bags of the dead soldiers. And so almost on a daily basis, just across the street from where I worked, I would see the rows and rows and rows of body bags. But what really happened to me was the day I checked into the barracks, my first day there. I checked into the orderly room, and they looked down this clipboard, and they said to me, "Oh, my God, we've only got one room left. We'll get you out of there as soon as we can. Get your bags. Follow me," the guy said. Last door on the left, down a long, dark hallway. And he opened the door, and we walked in, and there were anti-war posters all over the wall. Come to find out, it was the leading organizer of the GI resistance movement on the base. And they were keeping him isolated because they were trying to kick him out. But they had run out of rooms, and then they forgot about me. And so at night there was a knock on the door, and white guys would come in with chairs and sit in a circle and talk about the war in Vietnam. And I'm sitting in the corner, this young Republican for Nixon from a military family, thinking, my God, these must be what they call communists or something. Another night there was a knock on the door, and black guys came in with chairs, and they sat in a circle. They were Black Panthers from the cities, talking about racism. Me, this young guy that grew up on military bases behind the chain-link fences, protected, if you will, from the world, sitting in the corner again. And then they started smoking marijuana. Now, I want you to know I'd heard of it before, and I promise you I never, ever inhaled, not one time, never. But it could have been the smoke wafting through the air, I don't know for sure. But after a period of about 6 months, I began to pick up their leaflets and their newsletters and read some of the books they began laying around. And I began to see myself as an anti-war person. I began to change. I began a process of conversion. But what really finished me off was the release of the Pentagon Papers by the New York Times. Imagine this young guy that grew up reading the We Were There series. We were there at Lexington and Concord. We were there at the Alamo. We were there at the Battle of the Bulge, this patriotic series of books. And I read them, and I internalized everything. And then I read the Pentagon Papers, the government's own secret history of how they fabricated the pretext in order to sell the Vietnam War to the American people, to the Congress, to the media. And Daniel Ellsberg, working at the Rand Corporation, a Marine infantry officer assigned to, at one time, the Defense Department, made copies of this 7,000-page document. And in those days, you know, they say the old copying machines were very slow. You remember those? you put a piece of paper on there and it would take forever to come across. And he's at night after smuggling these out of the Rand Corporation, knowing that any moment the FBI was going to break the door down and come in and arrest him before he could release these Pentagon Papers to the American people. But this shattered what remaining illusions I had about what my government was capable of doing and how my government was capable of betraying the American people. And it changed my life forever. I've seen two films recently that I want to mention that I think reflect well the current historic reality that we live in. One is called Why We Fight. Have any of you seen it? It's going to be here in August, okay. It's about the military-industrial complex, and it begins with Eisenhower and his 1961 warning to the American people, beware of the power of the military-industrial complex. But the other movie I just saw last Friday evening, Al Gore's Inconvenient Truth, talking about global warming. And I would encourage all of you to see that as well. Going to be here as well, okay. One of those films, Why We Fight, is about endless war. And the other one is about, as I said, global warming and the abuse of our Mother Earth. But both films point to a maddening industrial policy that we have in this country and to a maddening foreign policy today. About a week and a half ago, 2 weeks ago, I went to Vancouver for the World Peace Forum. They had people there from 100 countries. About 5,000 people attended. My organization was asked to organize a track of space issue workshops that we did during the course of the World Peace Forum. And while I was there, I went to one workshop on U.S. military bases around the world. And they had speakers from Japan and Turkey and Puerto Rico, Okinawa, all over the world, giving their testimony about the impact of U.S. military bases in their community. And we know that today there are over 750 U.S. military installations around the world as part of this economic and military empire that we have today. Outposts of the empire, if you will. And these people reported on and showed graphic depictions with PowerPoint presentations of the environmental contamination as a result of these bases. We know that the military is the world's largest polluter today. And they each talked about the protests that are going on in their communities, in their country, asking the United States to remove these bases from their homes. The United States military budget today is over $500 billion a year, a 48% increase during the Bush administration. The black budget, how many of you know of the black budget, the Pentagon's secret budget? It's estimated that it's over now $30 billion a year, a secret budget inside the Pentagon that Congress is not even allowed to know how is spent. The development of a secret military within the Pentagon. So you add that $30 billion to the $500 billion we're spending, plus $8.5 billion a month for the occupation of Iraq today. $8.5 billion a month for the Iraq occupation. Now, friends, as if that wasn't enough, the Pentagon says, oh, we have big plans for space. The Pentagon has said that space is where it's at militarily, and that they must move the arms race into space so that they might be able to control and dominate space in the coming period. And the Pentagon has said that moving what I call Star Wars, warfare into the heavens, will be the largest industrial project in the history of the planet Earth. The largest industrial project in the history of the planet Earth, Star Wars. And I want to share with you one of the documents put out by the United States Space Command, headquartered at Peterson Air Force Base in Colorado Springs, Colorado. On their headquarters building, and in our movie, Arsenal, our documentary, Arsenal of Hypocrisy, we actually show the building. And right above the doorway, they have their logo that reads Master of Space. And in fact, they wear it as a patch on their uniform, proudly proclaiming that the United States will control and dominate space. Well, I want to read a couple things to you from this Pentagon planning document, Vision for 2020. Under a section called Future Trends, the Space Command says this: although unlikely to be challenged by a global peer competitor, the United States will continue to be challenged regionally. The globalization of the world economy will also continue, with the widening between the haves and the have-nots. Space superiority, they go on to say, will emerge as an essential element of battlefield success and future warfare. And then in another section called Control of Space, they define controlling space, and this is what they say. Control of space is the ability to assure access to space, freedom of operations within the space medium, and I think most importantly of all, they say, an ability to deny others the use of space. Here we are in the United States, 5% of the world's population, and we are going to deny other countries the use of space because we are going to be the masters of space. Now, friends, I want you to imagine for a moment that you are not citizens of the United States of America. Imagine that I'm on one of my trips to Japan or to England or to France or to Germany or to Scotland or Wales. Imagine you're from one of those countries learning that the United States is going to deny other countries access to space so that they can be the master of space. How does that pill go down? It's important to know that today, space technology is being utilized as a weapon. When the United States launched the preemptive shock and awe invasion of Iraq in 2003, 70% of the weapons that were guided to their targets in that initial attack were directed by space satellites. So today, space satellites, U.S. military space satellites, are directing attack onto the Earth below. So no matter, as they say here on the back of the Vision for 2020, you might be able to see the globe sitting on a pedestal. And what it says here is space, the war fighter's edge. And so no matter whether you're a troop on the ground, in a tank, on a boat, or on a plane, all warfare today on the planet Earth is directed by space technology. Thus, the Pentagon says, whoever controls space controls the Earth below militarily. Whoever controls space wins all the wars on the Earth below. And so for that reason, the Pentagon is now saying that in order to control and dominate space and deny other countries access to space, we, the United States Pentagon, must develop offensive weapons in space in order to destroy other countries' satellites so that they cannot see the Earth below and targets on the Earth as well. And the Bush administration is now poised for the first time in the history of the world to give the Pentagon the green light in a new thing called the National Space Directive, giving the Pentagon the green light to deploy offensive anti-satellite weapons in space. The development of research and development of these technologies has been going on for many, many years. Just to illustrate, you've all been told that we need missile defense to protect the continental United States from attack by the rogue states. We need to have a bullet hit a bullet in deep space in order to protect us from missiles from North Korea or Iraq or Iran. Well, I would submit to you that the notion of missile defense is a Trojan horse, that this program has absolutely nothing at all to do with defense. But they know that in order to go to the American people and say, please turn over the national treasury to the aerospace industry so that we can build the largest industrial project in the history of the planet Earth, they've got to frighten the American people and cloud it and cloak it around defense, when this program is not about defense at all, as is spelled out not only in this planning document, but a host of other planning documents done by the U.S. Pentagon and the Space Command. Go to our website, spaceforpeace.org. We have links to them right there on our home page. We'll take you to the documents you can read for yourself. It's all about offense and control and domination. Every year for the last 3 years, at the Space Command. They've been wargaming a preemptive first strike attack on China in the year 2016. Now, a few years ago, people would laugh at me when I would talk about the United States wargaming preemptive first strike attack. And people would say to me, you know, Bruce, you're getting a little paranoid. You've been around this stuff too long. The United States would never launch a preemptive first strike attack on another country. It's against international law to attack a sovereign nation. We would never do that. But now, as you know, it's a different game. Since 2003, since the shock and awe preemptive attack of Iraq, a sovereign nation who had absolutely, George Bush now admits, nothing to do with 9/11, no connection at all. That invasion of Iraq was, by international law, illegal and immoral. And so today the United States is now wargaming an attack on China in the year 2016. And this is how it goes. I read this in Aviation Week and Space Technology, one of the industry weekly magazines. They reported 3 years running this war game. They go to a computer and they launch the first part of the attack is with the successor to the shuttle. If you listen very closely, you now hear people saying the shuttle is an outdated military technology that needs to be replaced. The shuttle's job has been to put into orbit military satellites for years. That's been its primary role. Now they're talking about the military space plane that would have the ability, with massive armaments, fly down from orbit, drop an attack on a particular place, and then go back up into orbit again. And in the war game, as they went to use this military space plane, they had an Air Force lawyer sitting by the computer. And the computer operator turned to the lawyer and said, if we use the military space plane, will it violate the 1967 Outer Space Treaty that says there can be no weapons of mass destruction in space? And the lawyer turned back and said, you can use it, because the military space plane is not permanently stationed in space and therefore falls outside of the 1967 Outer Space Treaty. And then they wanted to use the space-based laser orbiting battle stations powered by nuclear reactors. Also in this planning document, you might be able to see this picture of this satellite orbiting the Earth, firing a laser, hitting targets on the Earth below. Also, its job would be to knock out other countries' satellites. The Pentagon has nicknamed this space-based laser the Death Star. And so the computer operator turns to the lawyer and says, can we use the Death Star in the preemptive first strike attack on China? And the lawyer turns and says, yes, you can, because the space-based laser is not a weapon of mass destruction. It's a weapon of selective destruction, and therefore falls outside of the 1967 Outer Space Treaty. And so that's where we are today. You might know that when George W. Bush came in the office, one of the first things he did was to get rid of, walk away from the 1972 ABM Treaty, Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty with the former Soviet Union, that carried over, when it collapsed, carried over with Russia. And he walked away. He gave 6 months' notice, and we walked away from it. Why? Because that treaty outlawed the development and deployment of so-called space weapon systems. And Bush wanted to move forward with the program. And so that treaty is now gone. But today at the United Nations, in spite of all this, every year for the past 8 or 10 years, Canada, our neighbor to the north, Russia, who can't afford to play this game anymore, China, who today has 20 nuclear missiles capable of hitting the United States, and the United States has over 10,000 nuclear weapons of our own. China not likely to invade the United States. We're one of their best customers in the world today. If you've been shopping lately, you've seen that China makes virtually every product in the United States of America. They're not likely to nuke us anytime soon. But China has joined Russia and Canada every year, going to the United Nations saying, let's all sign a global ban on weapons in space. Let's close the door to the barn before the horse gets out. And the official policy of the United States government during Bill Clinton's 8 years in office and during George Bush's 6-some years now, is there is no problem. Therefore, there is no need to negotiate a global ban on weapons in space. The fact is that the Republicans and the Democrats both agree that the empire would benefit from controlling and dominating space, and that our local congressional districts would benefit also from the jobs that are obtained by building a new generation of an arms race in the heavens. And so both parties then go forward supporting the research and development dollars. During Clinton, $3.5 billion a year, and now almost up to $9 billion a year under the Bush administration. About a month ago, I read an article from the Los Angeles Times that reported that the Pentagon, Donald Rumsfeld, Secretary of Defense, I like to call it Secretary of War, it used to be called that in this nation, has set up an elite secret army within the Pentagon. It's called the Strategic Support Branch. And their job, outside of the authority and control of the Congress, is to wage war around the world without the American people, the American media, or the Congress of the United States knowing about it. And funds both from the $500 billion annual appropriation for the Pentagon, plus funds from the black budget, the secret Pentagon budget, $30 billion a year, are now going to this use. Some of you might have recently read the articles by Seymour Hersh in the New Yorker, reporting on U.S. Armed Forces Rangers, Army Rangers, now being inside of Iran, carrying out basically terrorism missions inside of Iran, working with a known international terrorist organization that doesn't like the government of Iran, funding them, blowing up targets inside, trying to destabilize things inside the country. And you might also know of a man by the name of Ray McGovern, 27 years working for the CIA. In fact, during the first George Bush administration, Bush, the former director of the CIA, it was Ray McGovern who did the presidential daily brief for former President George Bush. Well, I organized a speaking event for Ray McGovern just about a month or two ago in Maine, where I live, and he said that, yes, indeed, it is true that the United States Air Force is now flying missions over Iran, shooting down Iranian airplanes, trying to provoke an incident, trying to provoke a response that would then justify a full-scale bombing campaign of Iran by the United States. A secret war going on by a secret branch, a secret government within the government. 2 years ago, I turned on C-SPAN one night, one of my favorite shows, and I saw this man being introduced to a room about this size, full of military officers. He was introduced as Thomas Barnett, author of a book called The Pentagon's New Map. At that time, an instructor at the Naval War College in Rhode Island. And when he was introduced, the audience was told that Barnett is Donald Rumsfeld's strategy guy. And so he came on to make a 3-hour presentation that blew me out of my seat. And I was so amazed by it that I immediately ordered the copy of the video from C-SPAN because I knew that nobody would ever believe a word I said. And I had to have it as physical evidence to show people what I had seen. And this is what he said. He said, we're not going to have jobs in America anymore, industrial jobs. We're not going to make stuff in the United States. Because why pay somebody $20 or more an hour in Detroit, that today has the largest unemployment rate in America, by the way? Why pay them to build cars when you can go to China and pay somebody a couple bucks a day to build this new $10,000 China car that's going to be brought to the United States soon? Or why pay somebody a good wage, $15, $20 an hour to make TVs in the Midwest somewhere when you can go to China and pay somebody, again, a couple dollars a day? He said it doesn't make sense. Under corporate globalization of the world economy, he said, every country is going to have a different role, and we are not going to make stuff. And so we're not going to have jobs, he said. Our job, under military transformation and corporate globalization, Barnett told this room of officers, was security export. Now, what does that mean? He said, there's a part of the world that is not submitting to the authority of corporate globalization today. He called it the non-integrating gap. The non-integrating gap. And he said it's the Middle East, where we're fighting in Iraq today and now occupying the Iraq nation, where we are now setting up 14, what the Pentagon calls enduring bases, another word for permanent. Central Asia, where we're in Afghanistan today, ostensibly fighting a war on terror, where we've now set up 6 permanent bases in Afghanistan. Africa, where Barnett told the audience, we'll be fighting 20 years from now. Where Nigeria and Sudan have oil, as you might know. And then Latin America, he said, is part of this non-integrating gap. Places like Venezuela, where Hugo Chavez has the audacity to want to take the profits from the oil in their country and use it to feed their huge poverty population. So he said our job in this coming period will be to go into this non-integrating gap and get them to submit to the authority of corporate globalization. He said, give me your young, angry 18, 19-year-old young men who love to play video games. Now, what does that mean? I said to myself, what's the inference here? Young, angry, alienated, 18, 19-year-old young men who know they have no future, working class kids who know they have no jobs because industries have all left the country. Where I live in Maine, the textile industry is gone. The shoe industry is gone. They're even closing down paper mills now, cutting the timber and exporting the timber outside of the country and processing the timber outside of the nation because people will work cheaper. And so in my state, increasingly for working class kids and lower middle class kids, the only job opportunity is to join the military. They don't need a draft today because they have the economic draft. Give me your young, angry, 18, 19-year-old men who while away their time playing video games because they have no other future. And Barnett called this force, this new force, Leviathan. And he said, with Leviathan, we will go into the non-integrating gap and get them to submit to our authority. And he said, and then following that, he used as an illustration the shock and awe invasion of Iraq, how very quickly the United States just took over the country without a fight, really. Saddam Hussein's forces just cut tail and run, didn't they? But he said, we're not doing the second part very well, what he called SysAd, Systems Administration. He says, we have to learn to do a better job of systems administration, and we have to have specially trained military forces to go in after Leviathan to do systems administration. And these troops, he said, will never come home. They will never come home. And so today, friends, answer this question. What is the number one industrial export product of America today? Weapons. And when weapons are your number one industrial export product of your nation, what is your global marketing strategy for that product line? And friends, when weapons are your number one industrial export, what does it say about the very soul of your nation? What does it say about us as people? When we have to have endless wars and endless supply of military production facilities in order to feed our families and employ our people, what does that say to the world about what kind of people we are in America, the land of the free and the home of the brave? The other thing that Thomas Barnett told that military audience that evening was that we're not going to do international treaties anymore, he said. Because international treaties will restrict our ability to do preemptive attack. And he outlined the ABM treaty, how we walked away from that. And he said, and this really shocked me, and I'm going to quote him directly. He said, Adolf Hitler never had to ask for permission to invade another country, and we will not either. That wasn't the first reference I ever heard to the Nazis in America. You might know about Operation Paperclip. Following World War II, you remember the Nuremberg trials, at which time the Nazis were brought to justice for their crimes against humanity? Well, 1,500 of the top Nazi scientists and military operatives never went to trial. They were smuggled into the United States by the U.S. military through Boston and West Palm Beach, Florida. 1,500 of them. They were the former Nazi intelligence that were brought to the United States to help create the CIA. They were the former Nazi scientists that were doing mind control experiments on the Jews. And they were brought to the U.S. to do the MK Ultra and LSD drug experiments of the 1960s. You might have remembered the stories about the people jumping out of windows because they were having bad trips, killing themselves, right here in the United States. Do you recall that? Those were the former Nazi scientists running those experiments. And then there were the Nazi scientists who had been taking Jews and putting them in freezing temperatures to find out how bodies would react if pilots were shot down over the Baltic Sea. And they were brought to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio to create the U.S. flight medicine program at the end of the war. And then there was Wernher von Braun and his team of rocket scientists that created the V-1 and V-2 rockets that Hitler used to terrorize the cities of London and Paris and Brussels with at the end of World War II. And they were brought to the United States along with 100 copies of the V-2 rocket. You might know the story about Peenemünde up along the Baltic Sea, where von Braun and his team were testing these rockets, and they used thousands of Jews and French resistance fighters as virtual slaves to build these rockets for the Nazi war effort. And then the British bombed this place, and so they moved into a mountain tunnel in central Germany, in the Harz Mountains, a place they named Mittelwerk. And to this place they brought 40,000 Jews, gypsies, French resistance fighters, Soviet Union military captured, even a black American GI, prisoner of war, were brought there to serve as slaves to build the rockets for the Nazis. And the people began to sabotage the operation. They urinated on the wires, left screws unturned, so that when von Braun and his team would launch the rockets, they were going haywire. And so they rounded up 100 of the slaves inside the mountain tunnel and summarily hung them in front of everyone else as a warning that you will not interfere with the rocket effort. Major General Walter Dornberger was in charge of this entire program. He was Hitler's liaison to this effort. And he was one of those that was brought over during Operation Paperclip. And he went to work for Bell Aerospace right here in New York State that made its riches building helicopters in the war in Vietnam. He became vice president of Bell Aerospace. And in fact, he was appointed to the first oversight committee when NASA was created right after the war as a civilian agency to do peaceful exploration of space. The military in the United States freaked out. You can't do that, they said. The military's got to be in charge of space. Oh, don't worry. Don't worry, they were told. We're going to have an oversight committee, a military oversight committee that ensures that from the first day, the Pentagon controls the space program. And Major General Walter Dornberger was appointed to that oversight committee. And in fact, he testified before the Congress of the United States in 1953, telling the Congress that the United States had ultimately needed to set up military bases on the moon so that we could control the pathway on and off the planet Earth. And he was the first one to come up with the idea. He was the father of the idea of the Death Star, the space-based laser orbiting battle stations around the Earth, giving the United States the ability to control and dominate space and the Earth below. So today in America, we have 48 million of our citizens who have no health care. And by the year 2013, it's estimated that that number will grow to 56 million people. Think of a pyramid for a moment, please. At the top of the pyramid are 29,000 American citizens. The pyramid of wealth. And at the bottom of the pyramid are 96 million Americans. 29,000 Americans at the top hold the equivalent wealth of 96 million Americans at the bottom of the pyramid in today's America. And friends, I ask you, can you have a democracy when you have that kind of growing income disparity in our country? Can you have free and fair elections when you have that kind of reality in our country? Or could we not say that today in America we have an oligarchy who runs our country, a corporate oligarchy who are not concerned about the American people? Their job is to maximize profits internationally. The job of the corporation is to maximize profits at all costs. Don't show allegiance to Maine, to New York, to Ohio. Maximize profits internationally, so if you have to move jobs out of the country, you move them out. And if you have to use the U.S. military to secure control of resources around the world, oil, diminishing supplies of water around the world, you do so. And you change a country's role in the world from great beacon of freedom to security export. I want to tell you that I think the time has come for a transformative vision in America. The peace movement, which I've been a part of now for the last 4 years, is always saying no. No war in Iraq. No Star Wars. The time has come for us to have a yes. And friends, what is our yes in the midst of all this that surrounds us? Well, recently I was in Colorado Springs, home of the Space Command, for a conference, the Space Foundation annual meeting. This is the aerospace industry's big event, the people that are trying to move the arms race into space. They had 8,000 people in attendance, military, corporate people, and everyone else. And what I learned in that community, they have 5 military installations. 357,000 people live in Colorado Springs, and 47% of that population works for the military-industrial complex. And so I ask you, can we ever end America's addiction to endless war as long as our communities are increasingly dependent on production of weapons of war? How can we get out from behind this 8-ball? So what is our yes? Well, I talked earlier about global warming. Al Gore's message about our concerns that our industrial policy is leading to the death of the planet. Could we not, with our tax dollars, all over America, could we not begin to convert the military-industrial complex to peacetime and sustainable technology development? Could we not, with your tax dollars, convert the military production facilities to build the best rail system in the entire world? Could we not do that? Connecting every corner of the United States of America, getting us out of our cars, lessening our dependence on foreign oil, making it unnecessary for us to go to war for oil. Could we not, with your tax dollars at these military production facilities, put a solar system on virtually every house and business in America? Even in Maine, I've discovered solar works. Think of the jobs created all across America: research, development, design, manufacturing, installation, repair. Think of the jobs created all over America. Good jobs, building solar, giving our children and our grandchildren hope on this planet as we reduce global warming. Could we not do that with your tax dollars? And could we not, with your tax dollars, become the world's largest producer of windmills? Denmark is now the world's largest producers of windmills. They've converted a shipyard in Copenhagen. Could we not build wind? Recently, I was on a speaking tour in Kansas, and I learned, much to my surprise, that Kansas is the Saudi Arabia of wind in America. Why couldn't we have a huge wind farm in that rural area of these rural areas all across Kansas and all over America. Why can't we build wind power with your tax dollars at these military production facilities? And imagine, imagine what comes of it. You have the peace movement, working with the environmental movement, working with the labor movement. It's in all of the interests of each of these movements to have this unifying principle to build on across the country, to build a political demand, to give jobs, to give a future to our planet. Why can't we begin to go home and talk about this is the kind of America we want in this coming century? I grew up in this military family. We moved around the world, and for a time I lived in South Dakota in the Black Hills. And I became touched at a young age by Native spirituality. And the Natives talked about the sacred circle, the sacred hoop, the family, the unity of all beings, the things that walked, the two-leggeds, us, the things that crawled, the four-leggeds, the things that fly, the things that swam, the rocks, the trees, the air, the water, everything was part of the sacred circle, the sacred hoop. It was all related. And that any injury to one was an injury to all. Well, friends, I think the time has come for us to heal the sacred hoop in America. Because we do have a broken soul. Please help us heal that sacred hoop. Thank you all very, very much.
Your questions, please, at the two mics. Just that one?
Why does the government permit C-SPAN to broadcast this 3-hour presentation that you described for us? Why don't they stop it?
Well, because they're very bodacious about the whole thing.
They're very what?
Bodacious, braggadocious. They feel very good about it. They're very excited about it. They're bragging about it. They think that everybody buys into this notion that the United States should control and dominate the world. They're very excited about it. The Pentagon brags about this stuff. This is not hidden. This is not conspiracy. This is out there. It's reported in Space News every week, in Aviation Week and Space Technology, in Jane's Defense Weekly. The information is out there. They're very brazen about it. They're very proud of this. We are the chosen people. If anyone's going to control space, we should, because we value human life more than anyone else on the earth. This is what they say. Yes, sir.
I'm trying to figure out what there is for a strategy to do something about the mess we're in. I mean, you say, let's take our tax dollars and build windmills and stuff. I mean, the whole election system is gone. It doesn't work anymore. We cannot elect a party that's going to change anything because everybody is bought off, and anyway, the whole election system is co-opted. Our young people have no jobs except the military. We are in a public health crisis, and nobody's doing anything about it. What is there to do but organize from scratch?
The way Cesar Chavez built the United Farm Workers Union was not by taking out a full-page ad in the Sacramento Bee or, going to the state legislature in California. He began going from farm worker community labor camp to labor camp. And he would talk to one worker at a time. And in fact, he would say to a worker, how much money do you got on you right now? The guy'd say, I got 20 bucks. He'd say, give me 10 so I can buy gas to go to the next labor camp. and that will make you a member of the union. And if you die, we'll give you your family a $500 burial policy. That's the only thing I can promise you right now, he said. And what he did was he built a union by going from camp to camp to camp, talking from person to person to person. Well, in America today, where we face corporate media domination, increasingly difficult to get this message out to the people, where we have a Congress, I think, under the control of the multinational corporations, and the political parties essentially under their control as well, I think we've got to begin to do what a good gardener does. Some of you might garden, and you know if you want to grow fruit and vegetables, you have to prepare the soil. And how do you prepare the soil other than get on your knees and get down in the dirt and get your fingers and fingernails dirty, and then you plant the seeds and you go back and nurture them and water them, and that is how maybe you'll become a successful gardener. Well, I think organizing is the same thing. What we have in America today, quite frankly, are people who don't want to do the work. They want the social change, but they also want the magic bullet. Tell me the one thing we can do, people always ask me, what's the one thing we can do to take care of all this? Well, there is not one thing. There's going to be a succession of things we do over a multiplicity of generations. We're in a hell of a fight. We're in the fight of our lives, to be honest with you. Trying to hang on to a little shred of democracy we have left in the face of massive environmental problems that we now face. We've got to get out there and realize that nothing is more important today. Tennis is not more important. Golf is not more important. Television is not more important. Graduate school is not more important. Nothing is more important than getting out and organizing our peers to take our country back. Nothing is more important than that. I have a 26-year-old son. The very best thing I can leave my son on this earth is a future, is the hope and the possibility of a future. And the only way we're going to do that is if we get out and dedicate our lives to organizing our fellow citizens day by day wherever we live. That's the answer to your question, sir. Go ahead.
I'd like to know what your take is on 911 and the possibility it was an inside job, and what efforts we should put into this.
Well, I can tell you that immediately after 9/11, everywhere I went to speak for the next year, in the audience during the question period, this question was asked. And I can tell you that all across America there's tremendous amount of skepticism about, quote-unquote, the official story. I saw a poll taken by Zogby in the last 4, 5, 6 months that over 50-some% of the citizens of New York City believe somehow the government was involved in 9/11. So that tells you something. The question I've had for a long time, have any of you ever heard the story about the golfer Payne Stewart? He was in Orlando, and he was going to a tournament. He got in his private plane with his friend, a pilot, and they took off, and they lost contact with the control tower. And immediately, I was watching CNN at the time. They broke in. We have a breaking story here. We've just dispatched, the military has 2 fighter planes to go up and find out what happened to their plane. This is standard operating procedure. They said anytime any plane loses contact with the control tower, they're required by law to go up and intercept these planes. And they went up, and the pilots reported they saw Payne Stewart and the pilot slumped over the control towers. They said obviously there was an oxygen malfunction. The plane's going to crash. They stayed with the 2 fighter planes, stayed with it to make sure it wouldn't crash on a city. It crashed into an empty field. So then on 9/11, you had 4 jetliners losing contact with the control towers, and nothing happened. No planes were scrambled. Now that, to me, indicated that somewhere, someone had to have the authority to call or stand down, tell the planes not to go. Because I've read that prior to 9/11 that year, 67 other instances like this had happened, and in every one of the cases, planes were scrambled to go up and find out what happened. But in this case, on 9/11, nothing happened. So I think it's very legitimate for the citizens of this country to be very curious about what's going on, because the essential point here is that as a result of 9/11, what happened? Without debate, without congressional declaration of war, we then did an invasion of Afghanistan and now an invasion and occupation of Iraq, all predicated on a war on terrorism. So there are, I think, a lot of questions to be answered, and I think it's appropriate to ask them. What we've seen is a complete military takeover of the space program. The shuttle, every shuttle mission, they're now doing military technology, Star Wars experiments on board. The space station, a lot of the missions they're doing on board that. They say, well, we're studying bugs and moss and things like that. But that's just the public relations aspect of it. Really what they're doing is they're doing Star Wars tests from the space station to develop offensive space weaponry. The space station, by the way, originally they told us taxpayers that it was going to cost $10 billion to build, start to finish. Well, guess what the price is today? $100 billion, start to finish. They're not finished with it yet, but it's grown in cost that much. It's a boondoggle for the military-industrial complex. The military-industrial complex has discovered that space technology is the greatest profit driver in the history of the planet. And that's why one of the key reasons they intend to move the arms race into space, because it's enormous profits. To launch, to do things in space is enormously costly. And in fact, so costly that the aerospace industry, in an editorial in one of their publications called Space News a couple of years ago, said, look, we understand that this stuff is so expensive, and we know we've got to come up with a funding source for it. And we have. And we're now sending our lobbyists to Washington to secure that funding source. And it is, they said, the entitlement programs, which are officially defined as Social Security, which you said you want when you get old, right. Medicare, Medicaid, and what's left of the welfare program after Bill Clinton got through with it. These are the programs that the aerospace industry, the weapons industry, that Eisenhower warned us to be careful about, to watch, to keep an eye on. They're gaining undue influence in the halls of Congress, he said. These are the programs that the aerospace industry has identified for defunding to move the money into Star Wars. And so the Pentagon is saying, under corporate globalization, every country is going to have a different job. And our job in America, they say, will be security export. And it's no coincidence then that the number one industrial export product of America today is not shoes, is not refrigerators, is not VCRs, is not cars. The number one industrial export product of America today is weapons. And when weapons are your number one industrial export product, what is your global marketing strategy for that product line?
What?
War. Endless war. As George W. Bush says, the American people had better be patient. It's going to be a long, long war.
When will we know when we win?
We'll never win. You can't. Terrorism is not
it's an idea, right?
It's an idea. How can you beat an idea? How can you have a war on an idea? You can't, when are you going to beat terrorism? Anybody that says they're against the United States is automatically a terrorist. Does that mean you have a war for infinity against anyone that doesn't like what the United States is doing? It's a construct. It's a false construct. And the American people have been sold this out of fear. We've been made to be afraid. And who benefits from this? Who profits from this? The oil corporations, the weapons corporations, the pharmaceutical corporations, as we're now made to fear all kinds of biological and chemical stuff and everything else. Who's making money on this? In my community, they've just cut the salaries of janitors at the local school board, $4,000 a year, because as jobs bleed America, bleed from America and flow overseas, the local tax base dries up, right? And you can't afford to pay education anymore. And so you start getting all the local citizens arguing with each other. Whose fault is it? Whose fault is it that the school board ain't got no money anymore? Whose fault is it that we're all scrapping with each other for the last remaining dollars when we're spending $8.5 billion a month on the war in Iraq, money that could be used for education and healthcare and cleaning up the environment? We're fighting with each other over a few crumbs that are left while they're stealing from us on the global level. The corporations don't care about country anymore. Their job is to maximize profits internationally, and that's what they're doing. They're leaving America. They're disinvesting in America, and the American people have yet to figure that out.
Bruce Gagnon, our guest today. We're talking about whatever you want to talk about, but we're talking about peace, prosperity, and stuff like that. And some people will probably be angered, some won't be, but we know how that routine works. And you're listening to The Hall Closet, 483-8255.
Well, I think you were correct that the conservative talk radio is dominant in America, and there's a reason for that. I think one of the primary reasons is the fact that we have the concentration of media now in the hands of 5 corporations in America. And so we increasingly are seeing the ownership of the media, whether it's radio, television, newspapers, in fewer and fewer hands. And that then allows the conservative voices to dominate because of the fact that it fits the interests of those corporations that own the media. And what does that really say about the soul of our nation when weapons are the #1 industrial export product of our nation? What does that say about us as people? So this now is happening all over America, that more and more of our economy is absorbed by military spending. We're in fact addicted to military spending as a nation. When our local communities are dependent on weapons for jobs. Just to give an illustration, in the city of Colorado Springs, Colorado, there are 370-some thousand people who live in that community, and 47% of the people in Colorado Springs work for the military-industrial complex. Their jobs are dependent on warfare and weapons sales. And so when that happens, then what does that mean about what kind of foreign policy we're going to have? How are we going to project ourselves to the world? And I think this is the reason why we are now locked in this cycle of endless violence around the world. So as I travel from place to place to place, as I do so much, I write stories and reports that I send out to our membership about what I've learned in a particular community, what I've learned in a particular place, and that is what led then to the creation of this book. It's a series of stories from all my years of organizing about the things I've learned and the places that I've gone.